This is going to be my review for Ahsoka Episode 3, and wow, what a waste of 35 minutes. Not a lot happened here, and if there's any indicator how bad this show is doing, the series premiere clocked in at about 1.5 million viewers per Samba TV in its first 6 days, which is one of the lowest, if not the lowest, viewership that a Star Wars show has had compared to like Kenobi, Book of Boba Fett, Andor. It did about as much as Andor, which was very low. So for this episode, I'll go through the good and the bad. Let's start off with the bad. So the episode starts with some training for Sabine, and I guess all of a sudden now Sabine's going to be trained in the Jedi ways by Ahsoka, which is ridiculous. So this scene takes about 7 minutes, a really long 7 minutes. A lot of the dialogue here in the training that Ahsoka is giving Sabine is just flat. It falls flat. It's doing like a copy paste of what we've seen Obi-Wan and other Jedi Master characters in the Star Wars and George Lucas's Star Wars when they're training other Padawans, or like Luke Skywalker. If it was done with better acting, better delivery, and better characters, more charisma, and more interesting scenes, then a lot of the stuff that is being repeated here with the lessons in the Force would have been far more interesting and entertaining. But unfortunately, it isn't. They don't even add anything new to the Force or any new teachings. It's just the same old that we saw, but in a worse version than we saw in Star Wars. And again, this scene is 7 minutes long, and it doesn't help that there's a lot of staring, a lot of like slow moments in the line delivery and everything like that. It just takes too long. In comparison, we have the training scene in the first Matrix movie, which is an iconic, awesome, entertaining scene that reveals character in both the characters. It reveals characteristics in their character, and it only clocks in at about 5 minutes, and it's just far more memorable and interesting, and it teaches a lot of lessons. There's a lot of wisdom here that Morpheus tells to Neo. You compare something like this with the direction and the acting and the storytelling here to what we see in Ahsoka in that training scene with Sabine, it just all falls flat. There's also scene where Ahsoka and Sabine are talking about the Force and how like Sabine is not sure if she can do it. Does she have the Force? Ahsoka says all living things have the Force. And Sabine says, if that's true, why doesn't everybody use the Force? But Ahsoka does say that it's about talent. But one thing, and this is where people criticize George in the prequels, is that it also counts on your midi-chlorian count. And the whole point that George Lucas adding the midi-chlorians was to explain some of the power levels in Jedi and Sith. That's why it was said in that movie in Phantom Menace how Anakin's midi-chlorian count was past even Yoda's, and it just shows how powerful he was. So Sabine probably just has a low midi-chlorian count, and she probably will never have a chance to tap into the Force because the midi-chlorians are inside your blood, and the more you have, the more grasp of the Force you have, and the more you can hear the Force as well. There's also a scene between Huyang and Ahsoka, and how he says that he doesn't think Sabine is good for Jedi training. And Ahsoka says, well, who says that? The Jedi way, they didn't always necessarily do right. And Dave Filoni is just adding more stuff to antagonize the Jedi. He's been doing this in season 5, just propping up Ahsoka to be the saint and antagonizing the Jedi, making them look bad, all just to prop up Ahsoka. That sounds a little bit familiar, like what they did with Rey in the sequel trilogy at the cost of the original trilogy characters and their legacy, and demeaning them to prop up Rey. And Ahsoka says something so arrogant and stuff, and this is Dave Filoni, probably his arrogance seeping through her character, says that maybe their way wasn't good. And Hu Yang says, well, it lasted for a millennium, but then Ahsoka says, yeah, but it failed. But the point is that it lasted for a millennium. And if they lost, it was always because Palpatine had the upper hand. He had patience, and there was also the rule of 2 for centuries that got the upper hand, and the Sith were hiding in secret, and they were able to basically pull the rug under the Jedi. The Jedi at that point in the Phantom Menace, some of them just got too complacent, and some of them also got a little bit arrogant, and they didn't believe that the Sith would return. But it was mostly Palpatine's plan and the rule of 2 before him for centuries that allowed the Sith to hide and have the element of surprise to beat the Jedi. Dave Filoni is just a hack trying to change George Lucas's narrative that was set in the prequels. Now, the action sequence of them arriving to the planet and finally in the hyperspace ring, there are some exciting moments. It does at some point feel like it's Star Wars, especially the part where the whales come out, the space whales, but this whole entire sequence takes 15 minutes, and not lot of stuff happens. Is basically their ship gets damaged, and then Ahsoka comes out in some really bad CGI. One of the worst CGI we've seen so far in this show. Comes out of the ship and blocks laser bolts and does some acrobatics to try to block the enemy fighter's attack. And then she goes back inside. They go back inside and they go to the planet. All of that takes 15 minutes. It's just way too long. And this adds to the factor that not a lot happens in this episode. And it is basically an episode where they go from point A to point B. And then you have that 7-minute long Sabine training scene in the beginning. It's just more lackluster stuff. In comparison to the Phantom Menace, the escape on Naboo here with Qui-Gon, Obi-Wan, and the crew here, it takes about a little bit over 2 minutes, and it's a very exciting scene. It's kind of the same concept of them going from point A to point B, but a lot of stuff happens. It also introduces R2-D2 in a very heroic moment, and it also introduces a very important plot point in this movie where their ship, the hyperdrive, gets damaged, and because of that, they have to go to the nearest system, which is Tatooine. And long story short, they meet Anakin, the pod race, and everything like that. And just after this scene, they have the scene where they meet up with R2. They congratulate them, and Qui-Gon explains that to the queen that they're going to Naboo. And if you just add that scene, it's going to be maybe at 3 minutes, maybe 4 minutes, compared to the 50-minute scene of going from point A to point B, approaching the planet and everything like that, getting attacked by fighters. This is far more exciting. There are far more interesting character elements here. There's an introduction of R2-D2. There's a very important plot point here with the damaged hyperdrive, and there's a great CGI here for a movie that's from 1999, and compared to the bad CGI that we got in this scene with Ahsoka coming out of the ship and everything like that. All right, so this is some of the worst CGI that we've seen. It's clear that this was probably done in the void or something like that. It is really bad. In a better fashion, if Luke Skywalker was in this scene, what would he do? This is what he would do. This is what a true Jedi would do. He would stay on the ship. He would still remain in battle, but he would use his mind, his force powers in his mind to do something about it. He would probably maybe blur the vision of the enemy fighters, of the pilots, of Shin, to buy them time so Sabine can fix the ship and everything like that. That's what a true Jedi would do. That's what a real Jedi would do. He wouldn't go out there and look silly and start trying to think that he's gonna block starfighter laser bolts with his lightsaber. He would just stay on the ship, and he would do something to confuse the fighters and their minds out there in their enemy ships to buy them time. They wouldn't do this ridiculous thing that they're doing. So I leave you with this image right here on the screen, and that's how ridiculous this show has been so far, and how ridiculous this episode was with not much happening. Ahsoka got really bad viewership ratings in its season premiere, and with this episode, I don't think it's gonna get better. That's gonna be my review for this episode 3 of Ahsoka. Let me know what you think. Hit that like button if you like this video. In the meantime, I'll see you guys next time, and may the Force be with you.